My hand wouldn't stop shaking when I reached for that door handle. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day that feels completely ordinary right up until the moment it isn't. I had 2 bags of groceries in my left hand, my purse hanging on my shoulder, and my key in my right hand, and when I slid that key into the lock of my own front door, it didn't turn. I thought I had the wrong key at first. I pulled it out and looked at it carefully. Same keychain I had carried for 11 years, the little silver cross my mother gave me the Christmas before she passed, the loyalty card from the pharmacy where I picked up my blood pressure medication every month, my car key, my house key. I knew that key better than I knew most things in my life. I had used that key 10,000 times without thinking about it, the way you use something so familiar it becomes part of your body. I put it back in the lock and tried again. Nothing. It didn't catch. It didn't turn. It just sat there, completely useless, in a lock that had been changed sometime between when I left that morning at 8:15 to go buy groceries and when I came back at 2 in the afternoon. I stood on my own porch and I knocked. I could hear the television inside. I could hear voices, my daughter Brianna's voice, low and careful, and a man's voice that I recognized immediately as her husband Derek's. Music from somewhere in the back of the house, something with a heavy bass. The sounds of a household in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, comfortable and undisturbed, moving through the day like nothing in the world was wrong. I knocked again. Harder this time. The voices inside went quiet. I waited. Nobody came to the door. I set the grocery bags down on the porch steps carefully. I didn't want the eggs to break. I remember thinking that. I remember standing outside my own locked house thinking about the eggs, and I knocked a 3rd time, and I said, loud enough to be heard clearly through the door, "Brianna. It's Mama. Open the door." Silence. And then footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps that moved toward the door and then stopped just on the other side of it. I could feel a person standing there. Standing 2 inches of wood away from me, in the house I had lived in for 31 years, the house I had worked 2 jobs and skipped meals and sold my good jewelry to pay for, the house I had painted with my own hands on weekends because I couldn't afford to hire anyone, the house that represented the single greatest accomplishment of my life, and that person was simply not opening the door. I heard Derek's voice, low and flat, coming through the wood like something delivered rather than spoken, "She can't come in right now." I felt those words hit me somewhere beneath my sternum. Not like a punch. Slower than that. Like something cold being pressed into the center of my chest. I said, "Derek. This is my house." No response. I said, louder, "This is my house and you will open this door." Still nothing. I looked down at my groceries sitting on my porch steps. Chicken thighs. Sweet potatoes. The brand of cereal my grandchildren liked. Marcus always wanted the one with the blue box, Aaliyah always wanted the one with the cartoon bird. Orange juice. A pound cake from the bakery on the corner that Brianna had loved since she was 7 years old. I had bought food for all of us the way I always did, because that was what I did. I fed people. I showed up. I showed up with love and I showed up with food and I showed up even when showing up was expensive and exhausting and inconvenient, because that was what being their mother had always meant to me. That was the whole definition of it. And I was standing on the outside of my own door. My neighbor Miss Evelyn from across the street was on her porch. I could see her in my peripheral vision, pretending to water a plant that did not need watering, watching. 2 houses down, a car had slowed to a crawl. The whole block felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what Gloria Watkins was going to do next. I picked up my grocery bags. I walked back down the porch steps. I walked to my car, opened the passenger door, set the bags on the seat, closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and I got in. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and I stared at the house I had built from nothing. The house that had my sweat in its walls and my prayers in its foundation and 31 years of my life pressed into every corner of it. The house where my children had grown up. Where I had made Sunday dinners. Where I had held my grandchildren for the first time. Where I had sat at a kitchen table with a pencil and a budget and made the impossible math of our lives work, month after month, year after year, until it worked. I gripped that steering wheel. And I said out loud, to nobody, to the empty car, to God, to the young woman I had once been who had started this whole journey with 2 babies and a determination larger than everything stacked against her, where did I go wrong? But to understand how a woman ends up locked outside the house she built, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. You have to go back to before there was a house. Back to when there were just 2 little children and a young mother who had decided, with a fierceness that bordered on ferocity, that those 2 children were going to have everything she never had, no matter what it cost her. No matter what. My name is Gloria Mae Watkins. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, the 5th of 6 children, in a house on a narrow street where the winters came through the walls and the summers had nowhere to go. My father worked at the plant. My mother worked everywhere else, cleaning other people's houses during the week, alterations, and sewing on weekends, watching neighborhood children when someone needed it. We were not wealthy by any measure, but my mother did not allow the word poor in our house. She said it was a spirit and she refused to speak it into existence. What she offered instead was the understanding that your people were your people, and you showed up for them, and you gave what you had, and you kept going. I carried that lesson into adulthood the way you carry something your mother pressed into your hands, without examining it, without questioning it, just holding it because she gave it to you and she knew things you didn't yet know. I married James Watkins when I was 22. He was 25, full of plans and charm and a laugh that could fill a room. We moved to Atlanta together with $200 between us and the absolute, unshakable conviction that we were going to build something that mattered. Brianna came 14 months into the marriage, serious, watchful, born looking like she was already thinking about something. 17 months after Brianna, Terrence arrived, louder, softer in different ways, the kind of child who would make you laugh when you needed it most. And then, when Terrence was 8 months old and Brianna was barely 2.5, James Watkins made the decision to leave. He didn't announce it. He didn't fight his way out. He said on a Tuesday morning that he was going to the store, and he walked out the front door of our apartment, and he did not come back. I need you to sit with that for just a moment. 23 years old. 2 babies in diapers. An apartment rent that was due in 11 days. $212 in the bank. No degree. No nearby family. A city that still felt like someone else's home. That was the situation I woke up inside on the Wednesday morning after the Tuesday James didn't return. I lay in that bed with Brianna on one side of me and Terrence in his bassinet at the foot of the bed, and I listened to my children breathe, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, I can fall apart right now. Or I can get up, I got up. I got up every single morning after that, for years, without exception. I found a job at a hotel downtown cleaning rooms. The pay was modest but it was steady and it came every 2 weeks like a promise kept. I found Miss Ruth in my apartment complex, a woman in her 60s who watched babies for working mothers at a rate I could almost manage. I worked the day shift at the hotel and 4 nights a week at a diner 2 miles away, waitressing tables for people who sometimes tipped well and sometimes didn't tip at all and sometimes left messes that took 10 minutes to clean up. I didn't sleep more than 5 hours on most nights during those first 2 years. I ate what was left after the children ate. I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes for 4 years because the money that could have bought me new shoes was better spent on winter coats that actually fit, on school supplies, on the field trips I never wanted my children to miss because I didn't want them to be the ones who had to say their mama couldn't afford it. I did not complain about any of this. Not because I didn't feel it. But because there was no one to complain to who could change it, and complaining without the possibility of remedy only deepens the weight. So I carried it, and I prayed, and I kept moving. Some evenings after I put the children to bed, I would sit at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pencil and I would do the budget. I would write out every number, the rent, the utilities, the grocery estimate, the bus fare, Miss Ruth's weekly payment, the children's medical co-pays, and I would move them around on that page trying to find the arrangement that made everything work. Some months the numbers arranged themselves into something manageable. Some months they didn't, and I would sit at that table in the silence of the sleeping apartment and I would cry, very quietly, so the children couldn't hear me. And then I would wipe my face. And then I would pray. And then I would figure out another way, because there was always another way if you were willing to look hard enough and humble yourself enough to find it. There was always a way. I always found it. Brianna was a child who noticed everything. From the time she was very small she watched me with those big, serious eyes and absorbed things I didn't realize I was teaching. When she was 4 years old, sitting in the chair in the kitchen while I combed her hair one Saturday morning, she said out of nowhere, completely unprompted, "Mama, you work too hard." I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. "That's how we stay warm, baby," I told her. She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously. Then she said, "I'm gonna make a lot of money when I grow up so you don't have to work so hard anymore." I stopped combing for a moment. I looked at the top of her head, at her neat cornrows, at the small serious person sitting in my kitchen who had just offered me the most complete and devastating act of love I had ever received. "Okay, baby," I said softly. "You do that." I held on to that sentence for years. Longer than I should have, maybe. Longer than was wise. Because what I didn't understand then, what I wouldn't understand until much, much later, was that a child's promise made at 4 years old does not automatically survive the person they become at 34. Terrence was different in his way, louder, funnier, less focused but more tender. He had his father's build and his father's ease in a room full of strangers, which I never said out loud because I didn't want him shaped by a comparison to someone who had left. What he had that was entirely his own was a sweetness that caught you off guard. He would come home from school some days and find me sitting on the couch with my shoes still on because I was too tired to take them off, and he would sit down right beside me without being asked, and he would take my hand in both of his small ones and pat it. Just pat it. Like he was the parent and I was the child who needed steadying. Those moments held me together in ways I don't know if he ever understood. These were my children. This was the whole of my world. And I was going to give them the world back if it took. Everything I had. When Brianna was 7 and Terrence was 6, I found the house on Maplewood Drive. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, on a quiet street on the southwest side of Atlanta. It needed work. Serious work. The kitchen looked like nobody had touched it since 1974. The backyard was overgrown with things I couldn't fully identify. The master bathroom had a leak that had been seeping into the subfloor for long enough to do real damage. The previous owners had priced it to move, and it had sat on the market long enough that they were ready to negotiate. I had been saving for 3 years. Small, painful amounts, money I took off the top of every paycheck before any bill was paid, because my mama had told me to always pay yourself first even when paying yourself feels like a luxury you can't afford. I had put it into a savings account I didn't look at casually, because watching a small number grow slowly is its own kind of discouraging if you look too often. But I had checked it on Brianna's 7th birthday, sitting in the car outside of Miss Ruth's after dropping the children off, and the number was what I needed it to be. Just barely. But just barely was enough. The day I got the keys, I drove to Maplewood Drive alone. The children were at school. I sat in my car in front of that house for 10 full minutes before I could make myself go in. I sat there and I looked at it, the overgrown yard, the front porch with the railing that needed replacing, the windows that needed new caulking, and I felt something building in my chest that was too large to name properly. When I finally walked through the front door and into the empty living room, I put my back against the wall and I slid all the way down to the floor and I sat there and I wept. Not quietly the way I wept at the kitchen table over the budget. Fully. With my whole chest. The way you cry when something you have been working toward for so long that you stopped letting yourself believe in it fully has actually, finally, undeniably arrived. I had done it. From $200 and a man who went to the store and never came back, from hotel rooms and diner shifts and 4 hours of sleep and a pencil and a legal pad, I had done it. I had gotten my children a house. That house was never just property to me. I need you to understand that fully before anything else. It was not an asset or an investment or a piece of real estate. It was the physical proof that my sacrifice had meant something. It was the evidence that getting up every morning when getting up felt impossible had amounted to something real and solid and permanent. Every room of it was built from a specific sacrifice I could name if you asked me. The kitchen from the year I worked Christmas Day. The children's bedrooms from the year I sold my grandmother's jewelry. The backyard from the 2 years I didn't take a single day off. I painted every room myself over 2 consecutive weekends while the children stayed with Miss Ruth. I fixed the kitchen cabinets with tutorials I found in library books because this was before YouTube made everything accessible, and more determination than skill, and they held. I addressed the bathroom leak with a plumber I negotiated a payment plan with because I didn't have the full amount up front and he was a decent man who agreed. I planted a small garden in the backyard, tomatoes, collard greens, green onions, and a rosebush that Brianna had chosen herself from the garden center, standing very seriously in the aisle looking at each one before she pointed and said, "That one, Mama. It makes the yard look like somebody loved it." We moved in on a Saturday in August and I let the children choose their own rooms. Brianna chose the one with the window that faced the backyard and the rosebush. Terrence chose the one closest to the bathroom, which he said was a strategic decision, and the word strategic coming out of his 6-year-old mouth in complete seriousness made me laugh so hard I had to sit down. That first night we ate pizza on the living room floor. Because I didn't have furniture yet, I was going to get it piece by piece, which I eventually did, and Brianna looked around at the fresh paint smell and the empty rooms and the evening light coming through the windows we had cleaned together that afternoon, and she said, "Mama, this is the best day." It was the best day. I want you to hold on to that moment. Hold it carefully. Because you need to know the best day before you can understand the worst one. You need to know how the love was built before you can understand how the taking of it happened. The years that followed were hard years and good years and real years, often all three at the same time. I watched Brianna move from serious little girl to serious young woman with a quiet, relentless focus that I recognized as my own. She graduated near the top of her high school class. She earned a scholarship to a university in Georgia, and I drove her to visit the campus 3 different times before she applied because I wanted her to be sure. I wanted her to choose her future rather than stumble into it. She called me every Sunday evening throughout all 4 years of college, at 7 o'clock, like clockwork. Even during exam weeks. Even during her junior year when she was overwhelmed and exhausted and called me crying, and I sat on the phone with her for 2 hours until she had worked through it. I watched Terrence take longer to find himself, which I never held against him because people move at different speeds and the speed does not determine the destination. He struggled through high school, found community college manageable, discovered in a trade program that he had a genuine and significant gift for electrical work. The day he passed his certification exam he called me from the parking lot of the testing center and he was crying, my boy who rarely cried, my boy who made everything into a joke to avoid sitting with a feeling. He was openly crying on the phone, and I was crying in my kitchen at the house on Maplewood Drive, and we cried together for 5 minutes before either of us could string a sentence together. I worked through all of it. By the time the children were teenagers I had moved from the hotel into an administrative position at a healthcare company, better pay, benefits, a sense of dignity that the hotel work, as honest as it was, had never quite provided. I took night classes twice a week for 2 years and earned my associate's degree at 41 years old, sitting in graduation with people 20 years younger than me, wearing a cap that kept sliding to one side, and not caring at all because I had done it and nobody had given it to me and it was mine. The house on Maplewood Drive was always the center of everything. Sunday dinners with the door open for whoever needed feeding. Holidays without exception, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, the 4th of July when I made potato salad the way Mama had taught me and set up the card tables in the backyard. Every milestone celebrated in those rooms. First days of school, graduations, heartbreaks sat through at the kitchen table with tea and whatever wisdom I could offer, promotions toasted with the good glasses I kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator. The house was alive in the way that a home is alive when it is genuinely, consistently inhabited by love. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Brianna met Derek Henderson in her second year of law school and brought him home for Thanksgiving when they had been dating for 4 months. He walked through my front door in a tailored blazer on a November afternoon, tall and polished and smiling with every part of his face except his eyes. He complimented the house. He complimented the food. He asked me questions about myself with what appeared to be genuine interest and listened to my answers with what appeared to be genuine attention. He told me I had raised an extraordinary woman, and he said it in a way that was clearly practiced but also clearly true, so I took it the way it was meant. I liked him that first Thanksgiving. I want to say that honestly, because it would be easy now, with everything I know, to say I saw it immediately. I didn't. I opened my door to him the way I opened my door to everyone my children brought home, fully, with food on the table and a warm room and the genuine intention to love whoever they loved. But there were small things. He talked over Brianna sometimes. Mid-sentence, smoothly, like his continuation of a thought was simply the natural next thing and her sentence had been a placeholder rather than a complete idea. He had opinions about her career, about which cases she should pursue and which she should step back from, that seemed to originate in what would benefit his image of them as a couple rather than what aligned with her actual passions. He looked at the house, at my living room and my kitchen and my carefully maintained backyard, with the specific expression of a man who has privately made an assessment and decided to be gracious about it. I filed all of this away without speaking it. Because she loved him. Because she was happy, or appeared happy. Because a mother's job at that point is to be present and watchful and not to put her particular concerns between her child and a joy she has chosen. They married 3 years after they met in a beautiful ceremony I had contributed to financially in ways I didn't discuss with anyone because that was my business. I wore a gold dress. I danced with my daughter at the reception and I felt, in that moment, the completeness that comes when you see the child you sacrificed everything for standing in a life that looks like something good. At the reception, Derek's mother, Patricia Henderson, found me near the dessert table. Patricia was a woman who wore diamonds in the afternoon and spoke in a register that made everything she said sound like a gentle correction. She looked at me over her champagne glass and said, "You've done a wonderful job with Brianna. She's turned out beautifully." Turned out like Brianna was a project with uncertain odds that had beat expectations. I said, "Thank you." I smiled. I moved on. But I heard it. After the wedding, Brianna and Derek moved into a condo in Midtown, expensive, well-located, the kind of address that announces itself. Terrence had gotten serious with a woman named Chantel about a year before the wedding. Chantel was from Memphis, warm and straightforward and allergic to pretense, the kind of woman who said exactly what she meant and then helped you clean up afterward. I loved her immediately and without qualification. She and Terrence moved in together and then married in a small, joyful ceremony 2 years after Brianna's wedding, and I danced at that reception too. Life continued. I was still in Maplewood Drive alone, but the alone was comfortable, even peaceful at times. I had my church, my garden, my friend Carolyn, my grandchildren who arrived one after another. Brianna had Marcus and then Aaliyah, Terrence and Chantel had Destiny, and those grandchildren were the soft, bright center of my days. I babysat constantly. I cooked for them and sewed Halloween costumes and attended every school event I was invited to and many that I showed up to uninvited because I was their grandmother and that was my right. I kept a drawer in the kitchen specifically for their snacks. Marcus liked the peanut butter crackers, Aaliyah liked the apple slices with the little dipping caramel, Destiny liked anything sour. I knew these things because I paid attention, because paying attention to the people you love is the most basic form of love there is. This was my life and it was full and I was grateful for it. But underneath the fullness, something was beginning to shift. So slowly, so quietly, that I almost didn't feel it moving until it had moved quite far. Brianna started canceling Sunday dinners. First once a month, which was understandable. Derek's family had obligations, the children had activities, life was busy. Then twice a month. Then more often than not. The reasons were always reasonable. On the surface, a work event, a prior engagement, the children were tired, Derek's mother was in town. I adjusted. I stopped expecting and started treating each visit as a gift rather than a given. When Brianna did come, Derek came with her, and Derek had begun to say things that I noticed with increasing clarity. One Sunday, sitting at my kitchen table while I was cooking, he said to Brianna, loud enough for me to hear from the stove, "You know, this neighborhood has really appreciated in value. The comps on this street are significant now. A property like this, in this location, positioned correctly," Brianna said quietly, "Derek. I'm just saying," he said. "It's worth thinking about." I stirred the pot. Another Sunday, "Miss Gloria, have you given any thought to what your long-term plans are for the house? Because Brianna and I have been doing some research and there are options you might want to consider." "I consider my plans to continue living here," I said pleasantly. "Would you like more cornbread?" Another Sunday, after dinner while I was clearing plates, "At your age, Miss Gloria, maintaining a property this size alone has to be a burden. There are really elegant solutions for situations like this. Equity arrangements, family trusts, co-ownership structures." I set the plates down. I looked at him steadily. "Derek," I said. "I appreciate your interest. This house and I are doing just fine." He smiled. That particular smile of a man who has been redirected and intends to try again later. Then came the Thursday evening that I will mark as the moment when things moved from discomfort into something I could no longer quietly absorb. Brianna came alone. No Derek. No children. She arrived at 7 in the evening and sat at my kitchen table with the careful posture of someone who has rehearsed the thing they are about to say. I made tea without being asked. I set the cups down and I sat across from her and I looked at my daughter and I waited. "Mama," she said. "Derek and I have been talking about the house." "I know," I said. She looked up, slightly surprised. "I've been watching it coming," I told her. "Say what you came to say." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "We think it would make sense, and this is just a conversation, just an idea being put on the table, for you to add our names to the deed. Mine and Derek's. As a precaution. For legal continuity. So that if anything were to happen to you, there wouldn't be complications." I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Brianna," I said. "Nothing is happening to me." "Mama, that's not the point. The point is planning ahead. Being practical about, whose idea was this?" She hesitated. "Mine and Derek's together," she said. But the hesitation said something different. "Your husband put this in your head," I said. "And you brought it here because he knew coming himself wouldn't land the same way. Am I wrong?" She looked at the table. "He just thinks it's practical," she said quietly. He says it protects everyone. What it does, I said carefully, is put his name on something I built before he was anywhere near this family. What it does is give a man who has never contributed a single dollar to this house legal standing over it. And I want you to hear me clearly, baby, because I love you and I am going to say this once, that is not going to happen. She looked up. Her eyes were wet at the edges. Mama, I'm not trying to take your house, then stop sending your husband to my table with plans for it, I said. And stop sitting at my table carrying his plans as if they're yours. The kitchen was quiet. She left that evening without finishing her tea. 3 weeks later, Terence appeared at my door on a Saturday morning. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table, always the same table, the table where everything in this family had been decided and felt and survived, and he said, Mama, Brianna told me about the conversation you had. Did she? I said. I think you should really consider it, he said. It's just the practical thing, Mama. You're not getting any younger. I set my coffee cup down very carefully. Terence, I said. Did Derek ask you to come here? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. We talked. As a family. I am your family, I said. Your sister is your family. Those grandchildren are your family. Derek Henderson is your sister's husband, and I wish him well, but he is not the author of decisions about this house. Mama, I said what I said. He left too. And I sat at my kitchen table after both of my children had come and gone with Derek's agenda in their mouths, and I prayed. The long, slow, difficult kind of praying. The kind where you are not asking for something specific because you are still too afraid to name specifically what you are afraid of. But I knew. Underneath the part of me that was still saying these are my children and they love me and they would never do something truly harmful, underneath all of that, I knew. The months between those conversations and the lockout were a long, slow, tightening. Brianna answered my calls less quickly. Sometimes a full day would pass before she called back, and when she did the conversations had the quality of something managed rather than something genuine. The warmth was still technically present but it had become something performed. Something careful. Like she was behind glass and I was supposed to be satisfied with what I could see through it. Terence stayed warm but grew vague. He would agree with everything I said when we talked and then go home and apparently agree with everything Derek said too, which made his agreement a kind of currency that had been spent in too many places to be worth much. I tried twice more to have a direct conversation with Brianna about what was happening between us. Each time she arrived with Derek's logic already loaded and ready, the language of estate planning and legal protection and family interests, and each time I declined to be moved by it, and each time she left with the frustration of someone who has been sent to accomplish something and returned empty-handed. The last real conversation we had before the lockout was on a Sunday evening. She called at 7, the old time, the college years time, and for just a moment the sound of her voice at that hour made me feel like things were still okay between us. Then she said, Mama, Derek talked to an attorney. I set down what I was holding. He says there are legal options, she continued, her voice low and careful. If the property issue can't be resolved another way. He says that he's just protecting our interests and that the attorney thinks, Brianna. My voice was very quiet. Are you telling me that your husband has retained an attorney to pursue action against me over my house? A pause. He's just exploring options, she said. He says it's not adversarial, it is adversarial, I said. The moment you involve an attorney in a dispute with your mother over her home, it is adversarial. I need you to understand what you are telling me right now. Mama, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Make this harder, as if the hardness of it was something I was creating. I love you, I said. I want you to know that is not in question right now, not for 1 second. But I also need you to go home tonight and sit with what you have just told your mother. And I need you to think about who you are in this situation and whether that is the person you intend to be." She was crying. "Good night, Brianna," I said. I hung up. And 2 weeks after that phone call, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, I came home with groceries and my key didn't turn. You already know what happened next on that porch. You already know about the footsteps that stopped on the other side of the door. You already know what Derek said through the wood. You already know about Miss Evelyn across the street pretending not to watch and the car that slowed down 2 houses away and the grocery bags I set on the steps and then picked back up and carried to my car. What you don't know yet is what happened inside me during the drive to Carolyn's house. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I had expected to cry. I am not a woman who is ashamed of tears. Tears are just weather, they come when they come, but driving through the streets of Southwest Atlanta on that Tuesday afternoon with my grocery bags on the passenger seat and 31 years locked behind a changed lock, I did not cry. I thought instead. I thought about the 23-year-old woman at the kitchen table with the pencil and the legal pad and the numbers that sometimes didn't work. I thought about the 2 babies I had raised with my whole body, every calorie I ate, every hour I slept, every dollar I earned, calibrated always around their survival and their flourishing. I thought about the hotel rooms I had cleaned and the tables I had waited and the nights I had gone to bed with aching feet and risen again before sunrise. I thought about the day I signed the papers for the house on Maplewood Drive and sat in my car out front for 10 minutes before I could go in. I thought about painting those rooms myself on 2 weekends. I thought about the rosebush Brianna chose because it made the yard look like somebody loved it. I thought about a little girl with serious eyes who told her tired mother she was going to make a lot of money someday so she wouldn't have to work so hard. I thought about how far that little girl was, right now, from the woman who had stood on the other side of a locked door while her mother knocked. I parked in front of Carolyn's house and I sat in the car for a moment. And then I went in. Carolyn Briggs had been my friend for 22 years. We had met at church when the children were small, 2 single mothers in the same pew on Sunday mornings who recognized something in each other across the aisle and had been close ever since. She had held me through more than most friendships are called to hold. She opened her door when she saw my face and she didn't say a word, she just stepped back and made room, the way a true friend does, and I walked past her into the kitchen and sat down. She sat across from me. "They changed the locks," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me everything, Gloria. From the beginning." So I did. I told her about Derek's first comments about the property value. I told her about the deed conversation, about Terrence coming separately, about the phone calls growing shorter and cooler, about the Sunday evening call and the attorney. I talked for a long time, longer than I had talked about any of this to anyone, because I had kept most of it inside while it was happening, the way I kept things inside, the way I had always kept things inside. When I finished, Carolyn looked at me with the particular steadiness of a person who loves you and is not going to soften what needs to be said. "Gloria," she said. "You need an attorney. Not tomorrow. Tonight, you call and you leave a message, and first thing tomorrow morning you go in. Carolyn, my name is on the deed." "They can't, you are right," she said firmly. "And a lawyer is going to put that in writing so clearly that Derek Henderson and whoever he hired can't touch it." I stayed in her guest room that night. I lay in the dark and I let myself feel the full weight of what had happened, without managing it or reframing it or finding a way to make it easier to carry. I felt the shock of the locked door. I felt the humiliation of the neighborhood witnessing it. I felt the grief, deep, specific grief for my daughter who had let this happen, for the version of Brianna I had raised and the version of Brianna who had stood in her kitchen while her husband told her mother she couldn't come in. And then I thought about that woman at the kitchen table. The one with the pencil. She got up. I got up. At 9 o'clock the next morning I was sitting in the office of an attorney named David Monroe, who had been recommended by Carolyn's daughter who worked as a paralegal downtown. He was a serious, focused man who took notes in a precise hand and asked clear questions. I told him everything. He asked about the deed, sole ownership, yes. Any documents signed transferring or sharing ownership, none. Any power of attorney, none. He folded his hands. Mrs. Watkins, he said, that house is yours. Entirely and without legal ambiguity. What your daughter and her husband have done by changing those locks is unlawful exclusion of a property owner from her own property. We can address this immediately, and we can do it in a way that makes any future attempt to pressure you legally very difficult for them to pursue. He filed the appropriate paperwork that same day. A certified letter went to the Maplewood Drive address, legal language, precise and unambiguous, informing the occupants that Gloria Mae Watkins was the sole legal owner of the property and would be returning to it within 48 hours, and that any interference would result in immediate legal consequences including potential criminal charges for unlawful detainment of property. 47 hours later, I was at my front door with a locksmith David had arranged. The lock was rekeyed with keys that belonged only to me. I walked into my house alone. I walked through every room slowly. I touched the walls I had painted. I stood in the kitchen where the budget had been done and the meals had been made and the prayers had been prayed and both of my children had sat across from me at different points in the past year with another man's agenda in their mouths. I went to the back door and I stood there and I looked at the rosebush in the yard, October bare but still rooted, still present, still exactly where Brianna had pointed and said that one. I wept. Not from defeat. Not even from relief, exactly. From the overwhelming, complicated, layered weight of all of it, the 31 years, the sacrifice, the locked door, the attorney's office, the return. From being 61 years old and standing in the house I had built from nothing and understanding, with a clarity that was painful and clarifying in equal measure, that strength is not armor. That being the woman who always gets up is not the same as being a woman who cannot be hurt. That I had been hurt, deeply, by the people who should have been the last ones capable of it. I wept until I was done. Then I washed my face at my kitchen sink. Then I unpacked the groceries that had sat in my car through all of it, the chicken, the sweet potatoes, Marcus's cereal, the orange juice, Brianna's pound cake, and I put them away in my cabinets and I made myself a proper dinner and I sat at my kitchen table and I ate it. Brianna called that evening. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Mama," she said. "I'm home," I said. Silence. "Mama, Brianna." I kept my voice even. "I need you to be quiet and listen to me the way I have listened to you for your entire life. Can you do that?" A soft, broken, yes. "I was 23 years old," I said, "when your father left. You were in diapers. Your brother was 8 months old. I had $200 and a job cleaning hotel rooms and a diner shift 4 nights a week and I did not sleep and I did not eat full meals and I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes for 4 years. I did that for you. I did that so you would have something. So you would grow up knowing what solid ground felt like under your feet." She was crying. "I bought this house," I continued. "I painted it. I fixed the plumbing. I planted the backyard. I built Sunday dinners and holiday tables and I showed up for every single thing this family needed for 31 years. And last Tuesday I came home with groceries for your children and I couldn't get into my own front door." She was crying hard now. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know how, I can't explain how I let it get to this. I cannot explain that to you and I'm not going to try to right now because there is no explanation that is good enough." I listened to her cry. "I love you," I said. "That is not in question. But things are different now. That is not punishment, Brianna. It is just true. You and I have something to rebuild, and it is going to take time, and it is going to take me seeing who you are when you are not standing inside Derek's decisions. Mama, what happens now? With the house, with Derek, the house is mine, I said. That has been legally confirmed in terms that cannot be revisited. Derek will not raise that subject to me again. If he does, my attorney will handle the response. As for what happens between you and me, that is up to you. Not to Derek. To you. 3 weeks later she came alone on a Saturday morning. She sat at my table. I made breakfast. We sat across from each other in that kitchen where everything in our family had always happened, and she said, "Mama, I need to say some things." "Say them," I told her. "I knew," she said. "I want to start there because you deserve the truth. I knew that what was happening wasn't right. I told myself it was practical, that it was about protecting you, that Derek was just being thorough. But I knew. I knew that he wanted the house in a way that had nothing to do with your welfare. I knew he had a business contact who was interested in the land. I knew that what I was bringing to your table wasn't my idea wrapped in his logic, it was his plan and I was the delivery method." I held her gaze. "And I let myself be that," she said. "Because I had spent years watching you absorb things. Watching you be strong through everything. And somewhere in my mind I had convinced myself that you were unbreakable. That you would endure this too and we would all be okay. That your capacity to carry things was unlimited." She stopped. "I used your strength against you, Mama. And Derek used it and I let him, and I am ashamed of that in a way that I don't have adequate words for." The kitchen was very still. "You're right that I'm strong," I said finally. "I have been strong my whole life because I had to be. But strength is not the same as invincibility, and it is not an invitation to pile more weight on someone just because they haven't fallen yet. I felt every bit of this. I felt it every time a call went unanswered. I felt it at that door. I felt it in the car afterward. I felt it at an attorney's office explaining to a stranger what my own children had done." She wiped her face. "My strength was not a resource for anyone else to draw from without my consent," I said. "It was mine. It was what I had. And I gave it freely for 31 years because I chose to. But there is a very significant difference between choosing to give and having something taken." She nodded. "I love you," I said. "And I believe that you love me. But love without honesty is not a complete thing. And love without respect is not something I am willing to continue accepting from anyone, including my own children." We ate breakfast together that morning. Some of the silence between us was heavy and some of it was just the ordinary silence of two people sitting in a kitchen that has known them a long time. At one point she looked out the back window at the rosebush, bare in October, just its structure visible, all its roots. "It's still there," she said. "It blooms every spring," I said. "Every single year." She looked at me. "So will we," I said. "If you do the work." Terrence came 2 days later. He sat at the table and he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, and he said without any preamble, "Mama, I should have stopped it. I knew it wasn't right and I didn't stop it and I'm sorry." "Tell me what you knew," I said. He told me. He told me about the developer Derek had been in contact with, a commercial real estate firm that had been acquiring properties on and around Maplewood Drive for a mixed-use development project. He told me about conversations he had been part of where Derek laid out the financial benefit of getting my name off that deed. He told me that Chantel had told him from the beginning that it was wrong and he had chosen to stay in the middle, trying to manage everyone instead of choosing what was right. "Chantel is a wise woman," I said. "I know," he said. "I know she is." We talked for a long time that Saturday morning. The way we used to talk when he was a boy, patting my hand on the couch. The full weight of what we were to each other back in the room between us. The legal matter was resolved completely. David Monroe had created documentation so thorough and so clear that Derek Henderson had precisely zero legal pathway forward. The house was mine. It would remain mine. I had a will now, properly drafted, witnessed, and filed, that addressed the property's future according to my own wishes and nobody else's. Derek and I have not had a direct conversation since that Tuesday in October. When he comes with Brianna to Sunday dinner, which is happening again, slowly, carefully, the way a muscle you have injured comes back, he is polite. I am polite. That is as far as it goes, and as far as I intend it to go. My grandchildren run through my house and eat from my kitchen and sleep in the rooms their parents grew up in, and for them I hold the space open and warm because they are innocent of everything that happened and I am their grandmother and that is sacred. Brianna and I are rebuilding. It is not fast and it is not without hard moments. But she calls on Sunday evenings again at 7, and last spring she brought the children and we planted new things in the garden together. Aaliyah picked out a pink rosebush. Marcus helped me dig the hole with a child's seriousness that reminded me so much of his mother at that age that I had to look away for a moment. The yard looks like somebody loves it. It always did. I want to speak to you now, directly, before I close this story. Because I know that someone watching this is living some version of what I lived. Maybe not this exact version, maybe it is not a house, maybe it is a business you built, a family you held together, a role you have played for decades with your whole self. But the shape of it is familiar to you. The shape of being so consistently strong for people that they stop seeing your strength as something you choose and start seeing it as something they are simply entitled to draw from. The shape of sacrifice being treated as supply. The shape of love being treated as a given rather than a gift. We were raised, many of us, to be the women who hold things together. To be the ones who show up. To be the ones who endure and absorb and keep going and never let the seams show. And there is real beauty in that. There is real honor in that tradition of care. But hear me, because it took me 61 years and a locked door to understand this fully, your capacity to endure is not permission for others to test its limits indefinitely. Your willingness to sacrifice does not obligate you to sacrifice without end. Your love is real and it is large and it is one of the most powerful things about you, but it is yours, it is something you offer, not something anyone is entitled to extract. And the house you built, whatever your house is yours. You are allowed to say so. You are allowed to say it clearly, and without apology, and with an attorney's letter if that is what it takes. You are allowed to stand at the door of your own life and say, I built this. My name is on this. And I am not signing it away for anyone. I built that house with my own hands. I lost access to it for 47 hours. And I took it back. Not through drama. Not through screaming or revenge or bitterness. Through clarity. Through the simple, powerful, non-negotiable act of knowing what was mine and refusing to be moved from it. They thought I would always endure. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They thought my years of giving meant I had forgotten how to hold on. They were wrong. And standing in my kitchen on that October evening, putting away my groceries in my cabinets in my house, Marcus's cereal on the second shelf, the pound cake on the counter, the sweet potatoes in the basket by the stove, I felt something I am going to try to name accurately because it matters. Not triumph. Not vindication. Peace. The very specific peace of a woman who knows what she is worth and has refused to settle for less. The peace of someone who got up. Who always got up. And who will get up again, every single time, for as long as she has breath to do it. They thought I would always endure whatever they decided to do with what I had built. But what they failed to understand, what they never took the time to truly see, was that the same woman who endured everything to build it was fully capable of fighting everything to keep it. I am Gloria Mae Watkins. This is my house. And I am home. Asterisk if this story moved something in you today, if it felt like something you or someone you love needed to hear, Please take just a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to fight to hold on to something you built? Have you ever had to remind someone that your strength is not the same as permission? I read every single comment, and your voice matters in this community. Share this video with someone who needs it today. The next story is already waiting, and I promise it is worth staying for.